Welcome, everybody. We're just letting people come in and we'll get started in a minute or two.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're just letting people just call in, trickle in a little bit after, and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, well, it is about 5 minutes after the hour, so let's get started. So first off, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. My name is Sharon Ron. I am with the MAPC's Public Health Team, that's Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and I've had the privilege of working with several of our panelists today over the last few years, and I'm just so excited that they could join us and talk a little bit more about indoor air quality and the science behind it and some of the evidence for mitigation strategies. So if you don't mind, next, please. We just wanted to let you all know that we are recording today's event. We intend to use this recording to share out the information with folks after the meeting who couldn't join us here today. If you're uncomfortable with that, please just keep your screen, your camera off, and don't participate in the chat, and you shouldn't be part of the recording. So just wanted to let you all know. And in a few minutes, we'll be able to talk to our great panelists, but I'm just going to quickly off the top introduce them all. And I know that they will also introduce themselves much better when it gets to their turn to talk. But first we have Dr. Neelakshi Hudda, who's a research assistant professor at Tufts University in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. We have Dr. John Levy, who's professor and chair at BU School of Public Health in their Department of Environmental Health. And we have Dr. Doug Brugge, who's the professor and chair at University of Connecticut in their Department of Public Health Sciences. So again, a big warm welcome to our panelists and a huge thank you for them for joining us. Before we jump in, I hope just to hand over the microphone to Barry Keppard, who's the director of the MAPC Public Health, to speak a little bit more about this webinar and how it fits into MAPC's work and mission.
Thanks, Sharon, too, and thanks to each of our panelists, for being here today, too. As I was thinking, as I was thinking about the remarks today too, I was thinking of a story that my sister just shared with me recently too. My niece was walking out of her optometrist, and she had just gotten contacts for the first time. And my sister was just telling me the story about how my niece reacted when she kind of saw the world with her contacts in. All of a sudden, everything was just much more vivid, much more clear, much more bright, and just the way she reacted and how kind of wowed she was by that particular moment. And then thinking about that, it kind of was thinking about today's webinar and really the things that John and Neelakshi and Doug can share with us today is that I think increasingly we see more and more clarity around the way air quality affects our lives. There's some of us who have seen it very, very clear, again, to our panelists today who have been doing incredible research and communication around this work. But I think more broadly in the public, agencies like NAPC see this even more clearly in all the connections that it has in our lives. We've known it for a while, but I think in particular now during the pandemic, looking at the associations of where there is poor air quality, particularly issues around particulates and how that has affected people and particularly put them in worse conditions. And so thinking about the connections it has to everyday wellness, but the connections it has to long-term. And so we're really excited to be able to put on this webinar, and a lot of credit to Sharon and others at NAPC for the work they've been doing for years around particulates and broader issues around air pollution, to think about what we can do better as an agency to integrate this work. As we think about work as it relates to open space and people's time outside, as we think about decisions we make related to transportation and whether or not it's someone getting into a vehicle or someone kind of walking or jumping on their bike to take a ride or travel to work, or whether it comes to essentially what we do when we know people are using indoor spaces, whether it comes to where they live or where they work. And so we're really excited again to make these connections and learn more about it and bring it more deeply into our work too. So I'll stop there. I'll turn it back to Sharon, but we're just really excited again to have this content, have these relationships, and again, to see this incredible research emerging, not only broadly, but within the Metro Boston region too. So thanks again to Neelakshi, John, and Doug for being here today.
Thanks, Barry. So a little bit on housekeeping on how today is going to happen. Each one of our speakers have been asked to answer a guiding question, and they'll present for about 10 minutes to answer that question. And then we are going to break. I've prepared a few Q&A questions to kick us off, and then we'll open it up to you all for any questions that you might have for our speakers. And before we just jump in and I hand over to Neelakshi, just want to note that today we're really hoping to dive into the background science and trying to understand a little bit more about indoor air pollution and its impact on health and what sort of the background that we need to know as policymakers and planners and public health officials, but that there will be a second webinar 2 weeks from now, same day, same time. We'll talk about policy efforts both locally in Massachusetts and also national examples from other states. So if you haven't registered for that one, we'll drop that link at the end of this webinar, and I would encourage you all to join us for part 2 of that conversation. So with that, I'm handing over to Dr. Neelakshi Hudda to talk a little bit more about what are the sources of outdoor air pollution and how does outdoor air pollution impact indoor environments?
Hello, I'm a faculty at Tufts University and I research the impact of transportation emissions on air quality and the consequences of it for human health and environmental equity. And with that short introduction, I will launch into my prepared remarks for today. Welcome to the webinar. I will be talking to you today about the impact of transportation. Oh, looks like we have some technical difficulties. All right, I'll try again. Related air pollution on indoor air quality. Air pollution is a complex mixture of harmful constituents in gaseous, liquid droplets, and solid form generated by humans or natural processes. Air pollution that is generated by humans is modifiable. The quantity produced is modifiable, and certainly the exposure to it is modifiable, such that harmful effects on public health may be mitigated. There are multiple ways of characterizing or grouping air pollutants. They could be grouped based on physical properties such as gaseous or particulate matter air pollution, chemical constituents, say organic or non-organic particulate matter, or based on an outcome of concern, for example, allergenic air pollutants, mold or pollen that are a common concern in indoor spaces. Or they could be classified or grouped together based on source or origin, traffic-related air pollutants or indoor-generated air pollutants. Air pollution that we are exposed to in indoor environments does not solely comprise of indoor-generated air pollution. Outdoor origin air pollution is commonly detected indoors. The degree of its indoor presence, however, is modifiable such that the harmful effects on health may be mitigated. Presence of transportation-related air pollution in indoor spaces in urbanized areas is particularly concerning. Transportation emissions are a key contributor to spatial inequities in air pollution and disparities in health in urban areas. And there is a large volume of literature that links residing near busy roadways to adverse health outcomes. What is transportation-related air pollution? Fossil fuel combustion by various modes of transportation, which is often the predominant source of outdoor air pollution in cities, creates a complex mixture of combustion byproducts that pollute urban air. Traffic emissions or emissions from cars, buses, trucks, etc. are often the largest fraction of the transportation origin air pollution pie. And they create air pollution that we call traffic-related air pollution or TRAP, a term that you may hear often today. This mixture consists of tailpipe, that is gasoline and diesel combustion exhaust, and non-tailpipe, brake and tire wear emissions. Its chemical composition and physical properties vary by season, time of day, volume of traffic, and fleet composition. To summarize it succinctly, it consists of gases such as CO2, carbon monoxide, oxides of nitrogen, solid particles that may be visible to the eye such as soot, but which may be coated with organics, water vapor and suspensions of very small droplets on solid cores that are too small to see, that we often call ultrafine particles. And TRAP may also consist of some relatively larger particles such as fine particulate matter. So how do we measure TRAP? An efficient and effective way to do it is to measure some telltale marker of TRAP. Ultrafine particles are an excellent marker of TRAP. They are emitted in high numbers by fossil fuel combustion. Here's an illustration of that. I show data here to answer the question, what happened to TRAP during the pandemic-related lockdown, using ultrafine particles as a marker of TRAP. We conducted some monitoring in Somerville and compared it to our vast previous data set. Here I showed just 2 days selected for comparability in terms of meteorology. In the top left graph, red-yellow hues indicate high concentrations of ultrafines. Concentration of ultrafine is reported as a number count rather than mass. We show here particle number concentration, or PNC, which is a count of number of ultrafine particles. These are particles that are smaller than 100 nanometer in a sugar cube size volume of air, that is 1 centimeter cube. On the bottom right, we show data from a lockdown period day. Here we mostly observed outdoor concentrations of ultrafines that were comparable to what we would observe in clean indoor environments. But during typical traffic flow, the concentrations can be 4 to 10-fold higher. Traffic is not the only transportation mode that has substantial detrimental effect on outdoor and indoor air quality. Airports, seaports, train terminals, all large transportation facilities create air pollution that significantly impacts large populations in their vicinity. So how does TRAP get indoors? It gets in through doors and windows that are open to naturally ventilate homes. Wind forces the outside air, which carries TRAP, through gaps into homes. Outside air also gets pulled in more passively through what is called stack effect, which is essentially the hot air rising and getting replaced by colder air. And mechanical ventilation systems that force outdoor air indoors also force what is in the outdoor air indoors. And how much trap gets indoors? The answer to that question varies by pollutant, especially the size of the particulate matter pollution under consideration. IO ratios, or indoor to outdoor ratios, can vary from 0 to 1, but 0.3 to 0.7 is quite common for particulate matter pollution in the range of ultrafine or fine particulate matter. IO ratios also vary by physical characteristics of the house. Older, leakier homes will have higher IO ratios. Ventilation practices being practiced in the home make a huge difference. Natural ventilation will lead to an IO ratio of nearly 1 for the duration of the practice. Mechanical ventilation can be very effective in lowering IO ratio if equipped with filters, or can just force outdoor unfiltered polluted air indoors, leading again to an IO ratio of nearly 1. In the following slides, we will look at data from 2 studies from the Greater Boston area that demonstrate the indoor presence of trap. A near highway example and a near airport example. The first quarter mile is where we observe the most elevation and trap near major roadways or highways. About 3.5% of Massachusetts population lives within a tenth of a mile of major highway, where the elevated concentrations can be up to an order of magnitude higher compared to the urban background. The spatial proximity impacted by an airport is much larger in comparison to that impacted by a highway. We have detected Logan-related ultrafines in Winthrop and Chelsea, but also as far as Roxbury, Massachusetts. Here's some data from inside and outside of a home at Point Shirley in Winthrop. Concentrations of many pollutants were highest when this home was downwind of the airport. Most pertinent to our discussion today are the 2 graphs on the top right that look the same, and those are for outdoor and indoor concentrations of particle numbers, particularly ultrafine particles. The red arcs indicate the wind directions that orient this home downwind of the airport, and the richer redder hues in the dots that indicate concentrations indicate a higher concentration compared to the yellow or the gray, which we observed during winds that did not orient this house downwind of the airport. The indoor concentrations of ultrafine particles tracked the outdoor concentration pattern really well, which is shown in the graph on the bottom right, which is essentially the green line that's indoors and the red line that's outdoors, tracking each other very well. The indoor to outdoor ratio was around 0.8 at this home. And indoor concentrations during the times that the jets were landing overhead of this house were comparable to the concentration that we observe on a busy highway, around 50 to 100,000 particles per centimeter cube inside this home. Logan-related ultrafine particles have been detected indoors and outdoors up to 6 miles downwind by us. Concentration of ultrafine particles were higher at 6 homes that we monitored in Chelsea and 9 in various communities in Boston. When these homes were downwind of Logan, the graph on the top left shows that, with the gray bars much higher than the green bars. The green bars indicate concentrations during all of the winds, and gray bars indicate concentrations when these homes were downwind of Logan. And these homes were up to 6 miles away from Logan. And I want to illustrate an important point that I also made on the previous slide, which is that the indoor concentrations pretty much track the pattern of the outdoor concentrations. Here I show that for a home in Chelsea, the light red line tracks the dark red line on the graph on the bottom left. Interestingly, the light red line and the dark red line, indoor and outdoor concentrations at a home, also track the gray line, which is concentration from a central monitoring station in Chelsea, indicating there is a common pattern across all homes in the community. Next, I wanted to show you some data from a near highway residential building. Here I show example data from several apartments in a residential building that is located near I-93 and has a mechanical air handling system. The particle number concentration is shown on the y-axis in the graph on the top right for 2 days, and CO2 concentrations measured inside the home at the same time are shown in the graph on the bottom right. The arrows point to an interesting period. Some of the highest concentrations in this time series were observed, in fact, when apartments were unoccupied, as is apparent from the CO2 concentrations reaching near ambient level. In summary, air pollution from highways and airports impacts indoor air quality in homes in our metropolitan area. Higher concentrations of particulate matter, especially ultrafine particles, were observed when winds oriented homes downwind of the sources. The impact depends on proximity to source, physical characteristics, and ventilation practices being used in the home. And we commonly observed I/O ratios exceeding 0.5 for ultrafine particulate matter. Impact is modifiable by use of appropriate technology and practices. And with that, I'll pass on the baton to Dr. Levy. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Neelakshi. That was great. Dr. Levy, we asked John to answer the question of what should we consider when planning for a healthy indoor environment, and what are the health impacts of those air pollutants in general? So with that, John, will you take us away?
Great. Now, thanks, Sharon, and thanks, Neelakshi, for the lead-in. So as mentioned, I'm going to build on what Neelakshi presented and talk a little bit more about indoor air pollution, both considering indoor sources and some of the infiltration that Neelakshi discussed. And I'll try to be brief so there's time for discussion. So first, I do want to set the stage a little bit here of why we're concerned about this. So according to estimates from the Global Burden of Disease study, there are about 7 million deaths per year globally attributable to the combination of ambient air pollution and household air pollution. In this context, household air pollution refers to smoke and cooking fires generally in the developing world. So this is a bit different than sort of residential Massachusetts air pollution, but it shows a considerable burden from air pollution globally. And the effects are not just in deaths, the effects are also in other health outcomes, not just to the respiratory system, but cardiovascular and increasingly evidence of neurological and neurocognitive effects. So there's a substantial public health burden related to air pollution. And we all know that we don't spend that much time outdoors on a typical day, here in Massachusetts and in the developed world. So much of our exposure to ambient air pollution actually occurs indoors. Neelakshi referred to the infiltration to the indoor environment. So most of our personal exposure happens in our home and in our offices, even to pollution of ambient origin. Adding to that is the contribution of indoor combustion sources themselves, which of course also contribute to ambient air pollution. And it's worth pointing out that in these estimates of the burden of disease from air pollution, these actually don't typically take account of indoor combustion sources within the developed world. The estimates from ambient air pollution derive from health studies of outdoor air pollution. Indoor sources usually aren't considered. So this is yet another burden that compounds on the ambient burden as well as the burden from household pollution. So when we think about indoor air pollution, it's helpful just to contextualize it. And again, I think this builds on what Neelakshi presented. We're thinking about sources of pollution, and then we're thinking about factors that can modify the contributions of those sources. So starting on the left-hand side of this diagram, outdoor sources, as Neelakshi mentioned, include traffic, airports, industrial activity, and so forth. And then there's a number of indoor sources of pollutants, including but not limited to fine particulate matter. Cooking and environmental tobacco smoke are two of the most substantial ones, and those are the ones I'll be talking about most. But there are important contributions from things like cleaning products, from incense burning, from candles, personal care products, and so forth. But to get to exposure, there's a lot of factors at play. Again, Neelakshi mentioned ventilation, which is an important factor along with filtration. There's other structural features of the home that make a difference. The size of the living space matters. So if you put the same amount of emissions into a very small space, you get a higher concentration. So a smaller home, all else being equal, will have an amplified effect of indoor sources. And then activity patterns of people, of course, make a big difference. How often you cook and how you cook, whether or not you smoke and how you smoke, and then the time that you spend in home and interacting with those sources makes a big difference. I'll be talking a little about this later, about the important trade-offs that can exist, but as you're thinking about ventilation systems and methods to try to address indoor pollution and outdoor pollution, there sometimes are trade-offs. Again, you can make a home very leaky, and that can allow more of the indoor pollution out, but more of the outdoor pollution in. So we need to really think about that in trying to design optimal homes. And I think one of the threads of our research and many others is thinking about potential disparities related to who lives in close proximity to major roadways, who's more likely to have smaller homes, poorly ventilated homes, and have increased exposures. So I have a couple examples I'm going to share from some of our research. This is not obviously the only studies that have looked at this, but I think it's just helpful framing. So this is an example thinking about infiltration of pollution from the outdoors. So this is from a study we did in Massachusetts, where we had on the right-hand side ambient levels of fine particulate matter, or PM2.5. This is from a model that generated levels at 1 by 1 kilometer resolution across the Commonwealth for about a 10-year period. This is just a snapshot, I think, on an annual average basis for 1 year. And then what we did was take each building parcel in Massachusetts and estimate its air exchange rate. This is obviously not done with perfection for any given parcel, but it has to do with what we know about the age of the home and physical characteristics of homes from publicly available data. And so some homes are obviously leakier than others, or estimated to be leakier than others, given their age and potentially their structural and insulation status. And so you can overlay these data sets along with demographic data to ask the question, basically, who is most highly exposed to ambient air pollution and the portion that infiltrates indoors. So what you see here in these charts are some estimates of exposure distributions by race ethnicity. And in this case, we've simplified things by just putting exposures into low and high buckets. So low is below the 10th percentile, high is above the 90th. So if you look at the chart on the left, you can see for ambient PM2.5 levels, there are some racial ethnic disparities where there's a much higher percentage of non-Hispanic whites in the low bin than in the high bin. And you see similar things for air exchange rate, or AER. So you tend to have leakier homes if you're Hispanic or non-Hispanic, Black, Asian, or others. So that we have inequities in infiltration and inequities in ambient pollution. You pull those two together, you get the chart on the right, which shows quite substantial disparities. So those who have low outdoor PM levels and low infiltration are disproportionately non-Hispanic white. You could see, upwards of 95%, versus those who are in high ambient PM2.5 and high infiltration are more than 40% either Hispanic or non-Hispanic, Asian, Black, or others. So the structural aspects of homes exacerbates the existing disparities related to ambient air pollution. So pivoting to another example to think about indoor sources, this is from another study that we did in Chelsea, actually, in proximity to Logan Airport, where we went into homes and collected measurements inside and outside of homes to think about the contributions from both indoor sources and outdoor sources. And here's kind of the punchline. And there's a lot in these charts, but let me just walk you through the key features. So we stratified here the data into renters, homeowners of multifamily units, and homeowners of single family units. So those are the three charts that we see here. And the bars, the red shading refers to the percent of the exposure coming from non-ambient sources, so indoor sources. And the gray is how much is coming from ambient sources, so infiltration of outdoor pollution to the indoors. And then each plot has bars that look at the percentile of the distribution, basically whether it's higher end exposure or kind of mid-range exposure. And what you can see is across the board, different home types, different levels, the non-ambient sources dominate. They dominate more at the highest exposure levels. So if you look at the far right of each chart, the 95th percentile, you're seeing upwards of 90–95% of the exposure is coming from indoor sources. So the highest of the personal exposures, the highest of the indoor measurements tend to come when you have a big contribution of combustion sources within your home. We also asked the questions, it was hard to tell from that chart, but renters had higher exposures than homeowners overall. And we asked why, can we explain why that is? And the short answer is that we could, and it really came down to 4 factors in our models. There were the indoor source factors, so there were differences in both cooking and smoking behaviors. There was ventilation features, so do you have a working range hood and do you use it when you're cooking? And that helps to alleviate some of the contribution from cooking. And what's the size of your home or size of the building? So again, emissions into a smaller space give you a higher concentration. So when you account for these 4 factors, that actually explain the entirety of the exposure discrepancy. And some of these are modifiable. Obviously, building size is a function largely of income and other factors that are tougher to modify, but the ability to vent to the outdoors and the amount of indoor source activity, right, in principle, you can do something about those. So just as a final piece here, pulling these pieces together, as I mentioned at the beginning, you have interventions that can kind of push on one factor in one direction, another factor in the other direction. So there's interventions that could just be good across the board. Some interventions might do good things for indoor sources, but bad things for outdoor sources, or vice versa. So what does that look like in aggregate? So again, a chart with a lot of lines and boxes, but I'll hit the high notes here. This is from a simulation study we did in a multifamily building complex in the South End, looking at what different retrofits did to indoor concentrations of PM 2.5. So each of these 4 columns looks at before retrofit on the left and then after retrofit on the right. And the 4 columns refer to different types of source classifications. So the one on the left is a non-smoking home that has an average amount of cooking, all the way to the far right where you have a heavy smoking and heavy cooking home. And the first thing you can note is that there's a big difference in just the levels of exposure. So if you're on the far right here, heavy cooking and heavy smoking, you have about triple the concentration of the no smoking average cooking home. So the indoor sources make a big difference. For the second thing to note is depending on the intervention, you get big differences. So if you just weatherize, that's this top line with the kind of solid dark red coloring, in general, concentrations go up even if you have modest indoor sources. So you just tighten the building envelope, you're actually going to make things worse from an indoor air quality perspective. But if you add to that exhaust fans and HVAC filtration, you can make things better across the board. So that's these green dotted lines, and you could see whether you have a small amount of indoor sources or a large amount of indoor sources. If you do that bundle, levels go down across the board. So to wrap up, indoor air pollution in homes obviously is a blend of outdoor sources infiltrating in and indoor sources contributing. Building characteristics make a big difference. We've seen in a lot of our monitoring and modeling studies, indoor sources can really dominate. They can contribute more to indoor concentrations than outdoors if you have something like gas stoves, smoking, or other major combustion sources. And so to get to a healthy indoor environment, you obviously want to minimize those sources, but then also use the tools of the trade of ventilation and filtration so that you can address all the sources in aggregate and lead to clean indoor air. So I'll stop there and happy to answer questions in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, John. So last but certainly not least, we have Doug, who we asked to answer the question of what do we know about improving air quality? And before I hand it over to Doug, I just wanted to let you all invite you to drop any questions you may have for our presenters in the chat. We'll start collecting them now for when after Doug speaks. Can share them back out. So with that, Doug, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about approaches to mitigating and reducing exposure that we've thought about, and maybe some of you will have some other ideas. It certainly wouldn't be bad if there were some new ideas as well. Sharon, are you changing the slides for me, or is someone else?
Yes, we're advancing the slides for you.
Okay, let's go to the second slide. community-based participatory research has been our primary approach in the projects that I've been a part of and played a leadership role in. And I put that there because I think that has pulled us very actively toward addressing policy and practice. And what I say all the time is community people have a very short patience with being studied and want you to do something about the problem you're studying. And so we very quickly went to a two-track approach where we continue to study the problem, quantify the problem, understand the problem, but also begin working on interventions and policies and approaches that would reduce the risk for our communities. Next slide. I don't want you to digest this too deeply. My point is that we're still working on what the model is that we use, but it definitely involves science and action. It has parts of our work that are led by the professional researchers, other parts that are led by community partners, and there's a dynamic and fluid interaction between these that we hope is leading toward more evidence, then using that evidence to influence policy and practice. And another substantial component is issues of health communication and how we talk about these issues, how we educate, and how we engage a broader circle of people in the issues. Our primary focus has been ultrafine particles from traffic, mostly along the highway in Somerville and in Boston, Chinatown, but also in Chelsea and Dorchester and other communities as well. Next slide. I really put this in there just to show that a lot of our work is very interactive. This is the first design charrette that we did with funding from the Kresge Foundation. And I think it just captures the idea that we are trying to engage people. We're seeking input and ideas, not just broad ideas, but also specific ideas of what to do with this park or this building or this school, this housing. And we've done this many times now and very successful. I'd point out in the middle of that picture is architect Chin Lin. And one of the things we learned about these charrettes is that having people present who have the potential to influence design further on is incredibly important. And Chin is one of the people that we influenced, and then he brought his ideas into building designs for years afterwards. Next slide. I want to talk about several things briefly. We have very limited time. Broadly, individual approaches, behavior, and personal air purifiers are the two main areas that we've worked on, and then structural, location, building design, noise, vegetative barriers. And I'm not going to talk about source reduction, although that's critically important. And I leave it out only because it's not what we've worked on. It's not my area of expertise, and might be something, I think in the next session, Sharon, when you have Alberto Ayala talk, he will probably talk about that somewhat. Next slide. This is one of the early summaries that we did. Allison Patton, who's now at the Health Effects Institute, is a graduate student and helped us with this. And you can see list by effective and on-site and off-site filtration, air intake location, soundproofing, park locations, land use buffers. We thought at that time were good measures. Placement of buildings and parking structures, trees and plantings, built-in vegetative barriers. We're going to talk more about noise barriers, and decking over highways. Healthy vegetables is still something that has not been investigated very much to my knowledge. The next slide, let me just say a little bit about behavior. Carolyn Wong, who is at UMass Boston, had some NIH funding, and I worked with her and others worked with her on an educational intervention in Boston, Chinatown. We developed this interactive map where you could select the wind direction and wind speed and traffic volume and temperature, and then see how that would affect the ultrafine particle levels in Chinatown. And this is just an example of that map. It was bilingual in English and Chinese. And the really neat thing about this work is it showed that we could train high school students. We could have them work with middle-aged people, working-age people, and elderly people in the community, and translate the computer skills, and that we could see a tremendous boost in knowledge in the community people that we engaged. So this is an example of how we've tried to move on the issue of behavior and through education and engagement with creative techniques like this interactive map. Next slide. The other thing that we've worked on probably the most is in-home air filtration, and this is a topic that is gaining increased interest. There are basically two areas of thought. One is buildings that have a built-in ventilation system. I'm not going to talk about them very much. Those are easier to manage. It's easier to put good filtration in line with the airflow. But the other is buildings, most housing in this area, that don't have a built-in mechanical air handling system. And we've been putting these portable air filtration units or air purifiers in homes. This is just an example from the very first study we did in public housing in Somerville. The air filtration unit is over on the left, and then there's an air monitor at the arrow on the right. And so we're now in our fourth study where we've used air filters looking for efficacy at reducing pollution inside that's coming from outside on the highway, and then whether that reduction has health benefits. We've definitely seen reductions in air pollution. We've had a harder time showing benefits in health, but a study that Neelakshi was one of the lead authors on, and we published earlier this year, where we tightly controlled the conditions, next slide, in rooms in Somerville and Chinatown. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that blood pressure changes, that blood pressure increased more with higher pollution, a medium amount with less pollution, and the lowest amount with the lowest levels of pollution, controlled partly by using these air purifier units. And we are now in the process, next slide, of a full clinical trial in Somerville near the highway. We are stymied somewhat by the COVID situation. People are less enthusiastic about us having us in their homes, and we've had to introduce a bunch of precautions. But we are putting filters in, we hope, a couple of hundred homes, doing a full randomized trial, crossover trial, where they get real filtration and fake filtration, are blinded to which is which, and then looking at blood pressure and blood biomarkers as outcomes. And that study is going to be going on for a couple more years. But I point this out here because even though it seems obvious these air purifiers should help, the problem is not the air purifiers. They definitely filter out the particles. The problem is, and they do reduce them inside the home. The problem is, are people exposed enough? Are they in that room? Do they use the filters? Do they keep them turned on? Do they generate too many indoor pollutants? Do they open windows and then there's too much pollution coming in? So those are the things we're looking at in this study. Next slide. Location, just Chinatown, a few pictures of Chinatown, just to illustrate thinking about where you build things. Here's the Reggie Wong Park, right at the confluence of all these highways and on and off ramps. Here's new housing on the left-hand side, right at the tunnel exit where the pollution comes out from the big tunnel. This school was never built on the lower left, lower right, but there was a proposal to put a school, right, a double high school. It would be the largest high school in the state, right in the middle of all these highways. So the one thing we definitely want to promote is thoughtfulness about where you put buildings. And now there will be a new school in Chinatown. It still will be near the highway, not as bad as this, but there have been considerable efforts in the design to put in good filtration, put the air intakes on the roof. And that was another example of influencing the headmaster of the upper school in Chinatown, and then he influenced the building design. Next slide. This is from the charrette, a proposal for what that school could look like if you did build it and how to make it protected. And I just used this to show that point I was just making, that we want air intakes away from the sources of air pollution. We want good filtration, at least MERV 13 filters in the air handling system, and we want a tight envelope with good filtered replacement air, pretty much consistent with what John was saying earlier. Next slide. I would just point out that there are other parts of the country, as Wigwam Zamor, one of our community partners who cued us into this, that air filtration is a marketing feature in some places in California. And I don't think that's so much true here, but where there's a higher awareness of air pollution, people want to filter their air and want to reduce what they're breathing when they're at home. Next slide. In Somerville, we worked a lot on the idea of noise barriers. They don't have them yet, but there is still progress. There's efforts to raise money to make that happen. I think if you look especially at the image on the upper or the middle on the left side, you can see an artist rendition of what might look like if we were to put a clear sound noise barrier there with vegetation on it, how that could both protect the community from noise as well as air pollution, but also be a positive visual feature in the community. There are a lot of tricks to placing these barriers so that they're effective for air pollution. They don't work in every location, but in that location, it would be a benefit if we could get it. Next slide. Another Somerville slide, ideas from the charrette of how to redesign the park, the Foss Park there with this band shell idea. So there's a lot of possible creative ideas, and if you put people in a charrette and you tell them about the problem and they have enough time, they come up with a lot of wonderful ideas. Next slide. We worked on a zoning ordinance for the city of Somerville. It was never enacted, so I've come away feeling like zoning ordinances are difficult to use for this purpose. And I'm not going to talk about it at any length here now, but I do think that there is a particular problem that the Massachusetts Building Code prohibits local municipalities from enacting anything stronger than the state code. And that makes it's difficult to figure out how could we mandate, for example, that there be MERV 13 filters in housing and schools right next to highways. The one possibility is state legislation, and there is state legislation that's been under consideration, and now there's new legislation under consideration as well. So last slide, I would just say there's a lot more to this. There's a lot of depth. I would urge you to go to our website. We have a pretty good website. We just moved it to a new platform, and there's a lot of material there. It also would welcome if there are people who want to talk with me or with other people on our project teams more. Please feel free to contact me. Thanks, Sharon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doug. So I'm going to kick us off with our first question, which is, what is the biggest challenge in air pollution research at the moment? And Doug, if you don't mind, since you've been just talking, do you want to kick us off with the answer? Your answer?
You know, Sharon, that I'm at a clinic and my daughter's here, so I missed the question. Could you just repeat it, please? Thank you.
Of course. What is the biggest challenge in air pollution research at the moment?
That's the biggest challenge. Well, I don't know, but I would say that I'm going to say two things. One, the biggest opportunity with air pollution research is linking it with climate change, because most of the pollution we're talking about, this ambient particulate pollution that kills so many millions of people a year, is produced by the same sources: fossil fuel combustion, burning wood and other products, sometimes in developing countries, that are driving climate change. So I think that's a big opportunity, is linking the air pollution with climate change and working to reduce fossil fuel combustion. I think one of the biggest problem we face is we think ultrafine particles are a serious health concern, and getting that to be regulated, for there to be a federal level of regulation of ultrafine particles, is very challenging, and it's going to require research studies, human health outcome research studies at a higher level than anything we've been able to do so far. And so one thing we've talked about on and off for years is how and when and where would that kind of study happen, and push EPA to regulate ultrafine particles.
Great, thank you, Doug. Pause to see Neelakshi. John, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess just building on that briefly. I mean, I think, broadly, one of our challenges has been trying to avoid looking under the lamppost, because that's where the light is, right? And so there's been a lot of great research on fine particulate matter, which does have substantial health effects. So that's in part because we have tremendous ambient monitoring infrastructure and now satellite data and other things that allow us to do so. And so I think we've lacked, until very recently, comparable exposure data for ultrafine particles. Doug and Neelakshi and others have filled that gap to some extent, but there's much more that needs to be done. And similarly for indoor sources and personal exposures, there's much less information. So I think we lack the same kind of insight about these other pollutants or these other settings that we have for ambient PM2.5. And so, there's certainly a lot of reason to believe that the health outcomes are substantial, but we have less direct evidence base. And so I think, both from a technology standpoint and study design standpoint, I think we need better methods to understand exposures in the home to a variety of different things, including but not limited to ultrafines, and then extending that to characterize health effects.
Great, thank you. I want to invite anyone from the audience that has any questions or anything that you would like the speakers to elaborate on to feel free to unmute yourself. At least they can unmute themselves, correct?
It can now.
Okay, great. Feel free to unmute yourself and pop out in or drop something in the chat if that's easier for you.
I can fill the silence in the meanwhile, Sharon.
That'd be great.
Okay. So I agree with both Doug and John. And I guess the only twist I'll add to it is, advancements in urban mobility or breakthroughs that we'll have in urban mobility. I think pandemic has been great in terms of forcing us to reconsider how much we do actually need to commute and move. And I think I'm really excited about electric cars, electric planes, and all the advancements or change or the new framework that we are in. We should really consider how much we move, how we move, and how do we get goods from point A to point B.
I think that's really interesting, and it gets to something that I've been wondering, which is how we as planners and policy makers take this research that you all are doing and moving it forward to improve indoor air quality in our region. So Neelakshi, I get the sense that for you, it's really rethinking about what are our transportation needs. I wonder, John or Doug, do you have any additional thoughts that you would leave us with for sort of calls to action as planners, policymakers, advocates in the region?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I definitely agree with Neelakshi's point in that, as we're thinking about transportation policy, right, we need to think creatively and consider air quality effects and physical activity effects of these choices and really incorporate health. And I know MAPC has been involved in health impact assessment work. That's really, one mechanism. But I mean, I think another piece that loops back to the themes of this webinar, if you have more people working from home, you have more people then exposed to whatever is in their home environment, whether from outdoor or indoor sources. So it just amplifies the importance of thinking about what creates a healthy indoor space. So I think all these pieces come together as we try to reduce our carbon footprint, reduce outdoor air pollution, but then keep an eye on what people's personal exposures to air pollution then look like given adjusted time activity patterns.
That's great, John. And John, I think I have a question in the chat. Oh,
No, go ahead.
A question from Barbara Bishop in the chat of asking, is there a way, a device to measure the amount of natural gas coming from a gas stove or burner? If you suspect it's too high, what can be done?
I could take that.
Sure.
So I guess I'd break it in two parts. So natural gas as unburnt natural gas leak versus natural gas combusted and the combustion byproducts. Those would be the two categories. And there can be instruments that can detect methane leaks or natural gas leaks, and you could detect it, and there must be an infrastructure to support how to fix it. In terms of combustion byproducts, if you suspect your home is full of cooking emissions, a good way to solve that problem is, if natural ventilation is an option for you, open the windows, ventilate the home while cooking. And if you can install a range hood, and the range hood that vents outdoors, that should be a go-to option. Cooking on the back burners with the range hood on has been shown to be the most effective way in terms of exhausting what's coming out. And also not leaving utensils on the burner so that they remain hot for longer helps in reducing the overall emissions.
That's great, Neelakshi. And so I just want to sort of respect everyone's time and note that we have about 2 minutes, but there's starting to be some great questions being dropped in the chat. So I will ask if people have any lingering questions to send me an email. You should have had my email in the confirmation email for today's event. And if not, we'll follow up with an email. And we can triage the questions out to our panelists to get an answer out to all of you today. So before closing, I just want to thank our panelists again and remind you that we will be coming back together 2 weeks from now, Thursday, September 23rd, from 3 to 4 p.m. to talk with some great folks and policymakers from California and also locally to share some examples of policies and practice activities to mitigate indoor air pollution exposure. And Brian or Leah will just drop that link in the chat if you haven't already registered. And also wanted to note that MAPC's municipal collaboration and public health teams are right now doing a collective purchase for standalone HEPA air filters. Some of those that you saw and both John and Doug spoke to in their presentations. So if you're interested in informing or participating in this group buying, please reach out to Brian Luther, who will also drop his information in the chat. I think those are my 2 plugs. I will stay on the line right now as folks sign off if you have any lingering questions for me. But otherwise, I just want to thank you all. It was so great for you to join us for this hour, and we really appreciate making the time for this presentation in your day.
Thank you, Sharon.